Okay, so you've decided to own a cleaning business. Buy a mop, a few bottles of solution, print some business cards, and you're technically in business by the weekend. It's the most accessible business in this entire series, the one anyone with a car, a work ethic, and a mildly high tolerance for other people's bathrooms can genuinely start from nothing. Here's what the pitch doesn't tell you. The fact that the industry you're joining has an employee turnover rate high enough that some large janitorial firms effectively replace their entire workforce more than once a year. The fact that a commercial contract you win by underbidding a competitor by 10 cents a square foot can quietly turn your good year into your worst one. The fact that thousands of people who thought they were buying a small business ended up in federal court arguing they'd actually bought a job. And the $30 million settlement later, a judge agreed with them. And the fact that the dirtiest, most disturbing corner of this entire industry, the one nobody wants to think about, is also the one with the best margins in the whole business. Cleaning is one of the lowest barrier, highest labor businesses in the American economy, and that combination cuts two completely different ways depending on who's running it. Run well, independently, it's one of the most genuinely accessible paths to real small business ownership that exists. Run through the wrong structure, and it becomes a business model that extracts money from the person doing the actual cleaning rather than helping them build anything at all. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the low barrier to entry is a blessing for an independent operator and a weapon for a certain kind of franchise, and why one of the most valuable niches in this entire industry is the one most people would rather not talk about at dinner. Before the money, cleaning business splits into at least three very different operations. There's residential cleaning, homes and apartments, built almost entirely on trust and recurring relationships. There's commercial janitorial, offices, retail, and industrial space, built on competitive bids and multi-year contracts. And there's specialty cleaning, biohazard and crime scene cleanup, post-construction cleanup, medical facility sanitation, a smaller, harder-to-enter category with a very different pricing logic than the other two, and a very different Tuesday than the other two as well. The number that separates this business from everything else in this series is refreshingly small. A basic solo cleaning operation can genuinely launch for $1,000 to $5,000, covering supplies, a modest insurance policy, licensing, and some basic marketing. Compare that to the tens of millions it takes to open a laundromat's cousin, a car wash, or the billions for a hotel, and cleaning looks almost quaint, the rare business in this entire series where the SBA loan officer doesn't need a moment to compose themselves. Insurance and bonding stay proportionately modest too. General liability running $500 to $3,500 a year, a janitorial bond, the coverage that protects a client if an employee steals from them or damages their property, running as little as $100 to $600 a year for a small operation. Scale up into serious commercial janitorial with real payroll, and full insurance and bonding can climb to $8,000 to $12,000 annually, still a fraction of a single water heater on a private island. Which makes labor, not equipment or infrastructure, the actual business here. Cleaning is one of the most labor-intensive services in the entire economy, and the industry's dirty secret, so to speak, is retention. Wages sit low relative to the physical demands of the work. The hours are frequently early morning or overnight to avoid disrupting a client's business hours, and turnover across the commercial janitorial sector runs high enough that some operators effectively rebuild their workforce annually. Every departure costs you recruiting time, retraining time, and a period of lower service quality right when a client is deciding whether to renew, which means the businesses that actually make money in this industry are usually the ones that solve the boring problem of keeping people employed, not the ones with the fanciest floor buffer. Equipment itself stays modest too. A decent vacuum, a floor buffer, a pressure washer for the specialty side, maybe a used van once you've got enough recurring clients to justify one. All of it usually financeable out of early cash flow, rather than requiring outside capital, which is a genuinely rare feature in this entire series, and roughly the only part of this business that behaves the way the brochure promises. On the commercial side, the mechanism that decides whether any of this works is the bid. Commercial contracts typically run 1 to 3 years, awarded through competitive bidding where multiple cleaning companies quote a price per square foot or a flat monthly rate for the same building. And the temptation to win the contract by shaving the number down is enormous, because losing the bid means zero revenue from that building instead of thin revenue. Industry-wide, this dynamic is exactly why the broad commercial janitorial average nets out at a genuinely thin margin, commonly cited around 6% once you include the giant low-margin national firms, even though a well-run small residential or boutique commercial operator can clear 20% to 35%. The same industry contains both numbers, and which one you end up with depends almost entirely on whether you're bidding against a company willing to lose money just to keep their name on their client roster. Now, the part of this business that deserves far more scrutiny than it gets. A meaningful share of the janitorial industry operates through multi-level franchise structures, where a company sells cleaning franchises not as an ongoing business with its own client base, but as bundles of cleaning accounts assigned by the franchisor, with the franchisee performing the actual labor. JanPro, one of the largest names running this model, has faced lawsuits across multiple states alleging that the entire structure misclassifies what are functionally employees as independent business owners, stripping them of minimum wage, overtime, and paid sick leave, while charging them significant upfront franchise fees plus ongoing monthly percentages that can eat into as much as a quarter or more of their monthly earnings. One federal court case resulted in JanPro agreeing to a $30 million settlement with roughly 2,650 California franchisees. The District of Columbia's Attorney General separately sued and settled with JanPro over the exact same allegation, describing the arrangement as promising financial independence while functioning as strict employment without any of the legal protections that come with actually being an employee. And in an earlier, similarly structured case against a competitor, Coverall, a federal judge described the franchising model in terms that are hard to improve on, comparing it to a modified Ponzi scheme, a company that earns money not from selling services to customers, but from continuously selling entry into the system to new franchisees. You can buy a cleaning business in this industry and discover, sometimes only after years of ongoing fees, that what you actually bought was a job with extra paperwork and none of the protections a job is supposed to come with. Which is exactly why the corner of this industry nobody wants to discuss at dinner party has become the corner with real pricing power. Biohazard and crime scene cleanup require specialized certification, hazmat-grade equipment, and a stomach for work that the overwhelming majority of the population will pay almost anything to avoid doing themselves. Because few operators are willing or qualified to enter it, jobs in this niche routinely command per-job pricing far above standard residential or commercial rates, the same dynamic we've seen in medical waste hauling and specialty disposal elsewhere in the series. Nobody's negotiating hard over the invoice after a traumatic event in their home. The barrier to entry here is not capital, it's willingness. It's the one corner of the cleaning industry where showing up at all is most of the competitive advantage. So let's build the two honest years. In the good one, you're running a mid-sized commercial janitorial operation with a stable core of long-tenured cleaners, contracts you price to actually make money rather than just win the bid, and the small specialty division handling post-construction and biohazard work on the side. Turnover stayed manageable, insurance renewed without incident, and you're clearing a healthy operating margin across a diversified client base that doesn't depend on any single building staying leased. In the bad year, you lose a major contract to a competitor who underbid you by a margin that makes no financial sense, except that their business plan was apparently to lose money on that building just to keep their name on the client roster. Replacing that revenue takes months, during which turnover spikes because two of your best crew leads leave for a competitor offering 50 cents an hour more, and you're back to recruiting and retraining while trying to keep remaining clients happy with a less experienced team. A workers' comp claim from a slip and fall, ironically on a floor someone had just finished mopping, pushes your insurance premium up at renewal, and the thin margin that was already characteristic of commercial work compresses further, from a comfortable double-digit down toward the low single digits the broader industry average actually reflects. The gap between those years has almost nothing to do with how well your crew's cleaned. It's a competitor's willingness to underbid you into oblivion, a labor market that will always take the extra 50 cents an hour, and whether your growth came from client relationships or from a franchise structure quietly built to extract more from you than it ever gave back. So buy a mop, a few bottles of solution, print some business cards, and you're technically in business by the weekend. What actually determines whether that business is yours in any meaningful sense is whether you're the one setting the price, or whether somebody sold you a job and called it a franchise.